everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Geej ASMR. Welcome back. I forgot to turn my light on. I was like, why is it so dark? Probably, girl, because you forgot to turn your light on. So let me do that. This seems better, right? This is definitely a lot better. Also, I have this mic cover on the mic today, so hopefully we enjoy it. If we don't, I am sorry, but one of my ASMR artists that I watch, her name is Paige Turner. Shout out to her. I love her. I think she's great. And she always uses a mic cover similar to this one that I have on the mic right now. And her whispers sound so crisp and good. So I thought we could give it a try today. It doesn't hurt to try, you know? Like, if we like it, let me know. If we don't, also let me know. I love the comments. I love reading them. So, yes, anywho, let's get started into today's true crime episode. Today's case is Karen Reed. The Karen Reed trial, to be specific. Karen Reed never expected her life would end up here. Accused of murder, on trial for the death of the man she loved. According to prosecutors, she hit her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, with her SUV and left him to die in the snow. But like most stories, this one didn't start with tragedy. It started quietly. Karen was 44 years old, single, no kids. She'd spent decades building a career in financial services and even lectured at Bentley University. By all accounts, she lived a steady life. She'd grown up in Massachusetts, the middle child, an older brother, a younger sister. She was the outgoing one. John O'Keefe, the man at the center of this case, was a Boston cop with 16 years on the force. He came from a tight-knit family, 5 siblings, and was known as funny, generous, and fiercely loyal. People who knew him called him a great cop, but more than that, he was family first. In fact, everything changed for John when his sister Kristen, also known as Christy, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. It happened fast. She passed away quickly, and just 2 months later, her husband died of a heart attack. John didn't hesitate. He stepped in to raise Kristen's 2 children as his own. Friends say he didn't just take on the role, he embraced it. Those kids were everything to him. His friends and family still honor him. Many wear his badge number wherever they go. Karen first met John way back in February of 2004. It was through one of his high school friends. They dated briefly, just a couple of weeks, but that spring she left for Ireland on a work assignment and they lost touch. Years passed. Then, during the early days of the pandemic, Karen was working remotely when she decided to log onto Facebook. That's when she saw it. John had sent her a message. It turns out he had reached out to several ex-girlfriends. Karen hesitated at first. She saw a photo of him with 2 kids and assumed he was married. But eventually, curiosity got the best of her. She messaged him back, and that's when she learned the truth. Karen later said he loved life and he loved his sister more than anyone or anything, and he loved the kids. By early 2022, their relationship had been rekindled, but it wasn't always easy. On the morning of January 28th, 2022, a Friday, Karen and John had an argument. According to Karen, most of their fights were about the kids. John felt she spoiled them. That morning she texted him, "You have really hurt me this time." He responded, "I'm sorry. This has been an issue with me for 8 years. It physically hurts me to see everyone else in their life do things for them, and I'm forced to always be the bad guy." Karen later said that message stung. She thought it was unfair. She was angry. Karen Karen later said that message stung. She thought it was unfair. She was angry, so she left to cool off, driving to her home in Mansfield, where she spent the day working remotely. That same day, the state was bracing for a massive blizzard. As the snow started to fall, Karen had a change of heart. She didn't want to be alone, stuck in the storm. She wanted to be with John and the kids. Sometime around 6 p.m., she either called her father or he called her. They talked about her day. She told him about the argument, and he told her to stay home. He was worried about the storm, but she didn't listen. Around 8:35 p.m., Karen left her house and drove to Canton. She met up with John at McCarthy's bar around 9 p.m. A couple hours later, they walked next door to another bar, the Waterfall. That night, the place was busy. Karen and John ran into Jennifer and Matthew McCabe, people they saw often as Jennifer coached John's niece's basketball team. Also at the Waterfall were Brian and Nicole Albert and a man named Brian Higgins. Karen had just met the Alberts for the first time the week before, introduced by the McCabes. It was getting late when John turned to her and said, "Jen just invited us to the Alberts." Karen agreed to go. According to Karen, everyone in Canton drank. That's just what they did. Bars, night outs, friends gatherings. She would later say that everyone was some level of intoxicated that night, and that people in town regularly drove home drunk, rarely pulled over, never questioned. Security footage would later place Karen's SUV on the road at exactly 12:16 a.m. She said she was driving. She said she was driving, and John was in the passenger seat talking to Jen on the phone, giving her the address, 34 Fairview Road. When they pulled up, Karen said it didn't look like much of a party. The house was dark. There weren't any familiar cars outside. It didn't feel welcoming. She turned to John and told him to make sure they were actually invited. He agreed. Karen stayed in the car. She watched as John got out, vodka soda in hand, which was hers, and walked around to the side door of Brian Albert's house. Then, nothing. A couple of minutes passed. No John. She starts getting irritated. She called. No answer. She waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Still nothing. Frustrated and angry, she finally pulled away and left. Later, she would leave him a voicemail. "John, you are effing using me right now. You are an effing loser. F yourself." She had no way of knowing that voicemail would be the last time she ever heard his voice. The last time she ever saw him was stepping out of her SUV and into the darkness of that quiet house. By Saturday morning, everything had changed. A news report came out. A man had been found lying in the snow on Fairview Road in the middle of a blizzard. It was just after 6 a.m. That man was John O'Keefe. He was pronounced dead shortly after. That same morning, January 29th, 2022, the news spread fast. John's friends started getting the calls. He was gone, and almost immediately, a rumor started circulating. One version of the story, Karen had hit John with her SUV, that she had been drunk, that she'd left him there. She was arrested just 3 days later. Karen had already posted bail when the story first made headlines. Boston police officer killed, girlfriend charged. Former FBI special agent Jennifer Coffindaffer weighed in publicly, saying someone had come forward and claimed Karen hit John with her vehicle. The injuries, she said, were consistent with what EMT said was being hit by a blunt object, and in this case, that object appeared to be her SUV. According to her, everything looked like a motor vehicle accident. John struck and left to die in the snow. Karen knew the moment was coming. Police had already seized her SUV. They had her phone. She hadn't heard about any other suspects. She could feel it. At exactly 7:45 p.m., she heard car doors slam outside, several at once. She looked out the window. A dozen officers were there. They came to her door, and she was charged with vehicular manslaughter. The first and only person Karen called for legal help was David Yannetti, a prominent Boston defense attorney. When David heard the case involved a police officer, he knew immediately this wouldn't be treated like any other case. Even if prosecutors thought they had a case they couldn't prove, he said, they wouldn't let this one go. David also knew he'd need help, a lot of it. Karen started calling around. She contacted Harvard's Criminal Justice Institute, hoping to find support. A professor got on the phone and told her, "You need to look into the Kevin Spacey case. Look into the attorneys. Maybe you can get some help there." That's how she found Alan Jackson and Lisa Little, the defense team that would take on one of Massachusetts' most complicated and contested cases in years. 2 years later, the story is still a mystery. There are two conflicting theories, both detailed, both fiercely defended. And the public still doesn't have an answer. It's the classic whodunit, but with real lives in the balance. In the days after John's death, Karen said she was confused, bewildered. She had no memory of anything happening after he stepped out of her car. "I'd been drinking," she said. "It was late. I never heard from him again. Ever." She wondered, did I hit him? Did he try to come after me as I was driving away and I just didn't see him? She said the music was blasting. It was snowing hard. The windshield wipers were going. The heat was on full blast. She said she couldn't remember. When she hired David, she asked him those same questions. David didn't mince words. "Yeah, then you have some element of culpability." For about 3 days, that's where Karen's mind stayed, caught between not knowing and fearing the worst. John O'Keefe's funeral brought the town to a halt. Hundreds of people, officers in dress blues, friends, neighbors, citizens, lined the streets. The procession was so large, it shut down a section of the highway. For many in Massachusetts, John wasn't just a cop. He was a symbol of service, sacrifice, and loyalty. But one person was missing, Karen Reed. She wasn't allowed to attend. At her February 2nd arraignment, a judge issued a stay-away order barring her from any contact with John's family. That meant no funeral, no memorial, no chance to grieve publicly. While the world honored the man she once loved, she was already wearing the label of a killer. By then, Karen had already been charged with manslaughter, but soon the charges would escalate. The prosecution brought the case before a state grand jury and presented a more serious charge, second-degree murder, defined as murder with malice aforethought. In other words, not an accident, not a mistake, but a knowing act of harm. The grand jury returned an indictment, and the message was clear. This case was no longer about carelessness. It was about intent. Karen remembers the night of her arrest in fragments. She was in her pajamas, shorts, no underwear, a t-shirt. She threw on a cardigan when she heard the noise outside. Just before 8 p.m., a dozen officers descended on her home. She was barefoot in slippers. She pleaded with detectives, "Can I change? I don't want to be seen on TV like this." But they didn't let her. As they led her to the cruiser, one detective, Trooper Michael Proctor, made a remark to another. "See how crazy she is? Look at the cameras around here. She's more concerned about what she looks like on TV." It wasn't just humiliating, it felt calculated. But while the prosecution was building its case, Karen's defense team was already chasing a new lead, and it came from an unexpected source. Later that same day, David Yannetti returned to his home office. His paralegal told him someone named Mike had called, said he had information about John claimed to be a witness, but he said something that stopped David in his tracks. You need to look at the people inside 34 Fairview. David invited him in to speak with his investigator. He couldn't use the man as a witness, but the tip, it was a turning point. Because that's when the defense began to consider a different theory, one that would change the entire case. The new theory was simple but explosive. Karen didn't kill John. He was beaten inside the home, and his body was dumped outside in the snow. If true, it would mean the real crime scene wasn't the driveway or the street. It was inside 34 Fairview Road. And the people inside that house weren't just witnesses. They might be suspects. Karen's team believed this wasn't just a cover-up. It was a protective wall built around powerful people. Here's who was inside the house that night. Brian Albert, the homeowner and a Boston police officer. He wasn't just any cop. He was the head of the BPD's fugitive unit. Brian Higgins, a federal ATF agent with strong ties to law enforcement and personal connections to the Canton police chief. Jennifer McCabe, a close friend of John's and Karen's. She was one of the people who encouraged John to come over that night. These weren't just friends. They were people with influence, access, authority. Then came a discovery that made the defense stop cold. The prosecution had extracted Jennifer McCabe's phone as part of the investigation. Karen's team hired a computer forensics expert to analyze the data. And when he called defense attorney Alan Jackson, what he said next shook the entire case. I don't know if this means anything to you, but in Jennifer McCabe's phone, there's a Google search. Huss longed to die in the cold. It was time-stamped to 2:27 a.m. January 29th, 2022, just hours before John was found in the search. It had been deleted. The defense now had a new question. Why would someone already in the house be Googling how long it takes to die in the cold before John's body was found? The typo Haas instead of how suggested it wasn't planted or faked. It was real. It was raw. And it might have been someone panicking. Suddenly, the case was no longer just about what happened. It was about what someone was trying to hide. The Karen Reed case didn't just blow up in a courtroom. It exploded on the internet. And at the center of that explosion was a former history teacher turned controversial blogger, Aidan Kearney, better known online as Turtle Boy. He wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't a cop, but he had a loud voice, a loyal following, and a megaphone, literally. Turtle Boy wasn't neutral. From day one, he called it what he believed it was, a cover-up. He said what caught his attention was a court filing in April, specifically the detail about Jennifer McCabe's Google search. He remembers reading it, and with each page, his jaw dropped further. It's outrageous, he said. They were framing this woman. And he wasn't subtle. He went all in. As Turtle Boy began posting blogs and live streams about the case, the story took on a life of its own. His reporting became relentless, sometimes daily. He made it clear he wasn't just covering the case, he was trying to influence it. During one public demonstration outside the courthouse, he yelled into a megaphone, "Continue to spread the word. Every single person in Norfolk County needs to know. We are trying to affect the jury pool." That line drew serious attention from law enforcement, from legal experts, and from the FBI. Jennifer Coffindaffer, a former FBI special agent, was one of the many critics who said Turtle Boy had crossed a dangerous line, risking the integrity of the case. But for Karen Reed, Turtle Boy wasn't a threat. He was hope. She wasn't allowed to send Turtle Boy information directly, but she wanted her story out there, so she began sending court documents and information through a third party who passed them on to Turtle Boy, which was allowed. Eventually, Karen started skipping the middleman and sending things directly herself, and it worked. What started as a quiet courtroom drama turned into a nationwide debate, with people camping outside the courthouse, waving signs, recording podcasts, and posting TikToks. But not everyone was cheering. Brendan Kane, a close friend of John's, said the atmosphere around the courthouse turned toxic. There were people on the steps booing John's family. He felt the case had stopped being about truth and became about something else. The courtroom became a battleground, but the streets outside, they were a movement. Karen's legal team, especially defense attorney Alan Jackson, said the tension in the town wasn't just about this case. It went deeper. Alan said the reason that the community is so incendiary there is because they've been dealing with it for generations of what they consider to be sort of this old boys network of cops who just get away with it. Everybody knows everybody, everybody's connected to everybody, and that leads to problems and corruption. Massachusetts, he said, wasn't unique. The state has a long and tangled history of police scandals, officers caught planting evidence, lying under oath, dodging consequences. For Karen's supporters, this was about more than one woman. It was about all of it, and they wanted it to stop. When a buffer zone was established around the courthouse, banning signs, clothing, or visible shows of support, the Karen Reed crowd found a workaround. They wore pink everywhere. Pink hoodies, pink ribbons, pink umbrellas. It was Karen's favorite color, and it became the unofficial uniform of her defense. Then came April 16th, 2024. Jury selection began. Inside the courtroom, things got tense fast. Lead prosecutor Adam Lally opened with a list of names, more than 20 of them. His delivery was flat, monotone. Karen would later describe it as rambling. Then came the defense. David Yannetti stood up, looked the jury in the eye, and said the words that would define their case. Karen Reed was framed. It was sharp, clean, memorable. Defense attorneys were thrilled with the energy in the room. Liza Little, another key figure on Karen's team, described the night of January 28th. Karen and John had started at McCarthy's, a local bar, drinking with friends. Everyone was in good spirits. There were smiles, laughter, hugs. Security footage confirmed that. There were no signs of tension. Later, they moved next door to the Waterfall Bar and Grill, where they met up with Brian Albert, the Boston police officer, Nicole, Julie, and Chris Albert, Jennifer McCabe, Matthew McCabe, Brian Higgins, federal ATF agent. It was a full house. Drinks flowing, everyone relaxed. That's when Jennifer McCabe invited them back to her brother-in-law's house, Brian Albert's home, for after-hour drinks. It seemed casual, harmless, but things were about to get murky. Karen and John had never been to Brian Albert's house before. They didn't know him very well, just social in passing. When they pulled up, Karen parked her SUV in the street. She waited in the car while John got out and walked up to the side door as the house appeared dark and uninviting, and Karen wanted to confirm they were welcome. According to Jennifer McCabe's statement, she recalled that she herself was already inside, looked out and saw Karen's SUV parked in front of the house. At 12:31 a.m., she texted John, "Here, pull behind me." He never replied. 9 minutes later, at 12:40, she texted again, "Hello?" Still no response. Jennifer later said she wasn't sure if they were still outside or if they had driven assumed maybe they had gotten into a fight and maybe they had left. As the early morning hours of January 29th dragged on, Karen Reed was alone, angry, confused, and obsessively trying to reach John. After leaving 34 Fairview Road, she says she began calling him repeatedly while driving. When she arrived at his house, he still wasn't there. The anger boiled over into voicemail after voicemail, messages full of rage and betrayal. She was convinced he was avoiding her. Worse, that he was with someone else. According to Karen, there had been tension in the relationship for some time, much of it around John's kids and how she treated them. But on that night, her thoughts spiraled everywhere toward infidelity. She would later claim there were rumors of John being involved with multiple women in the Fairview neighborhood. By morning, her call log showed dozens of missed calls to John's phone, nearly 50 attempts, one after another. Karen said she finally fell asleep on the couch at John's house, on purpose, she said, so she'd hear when he came in. But when she woke up around 4:30 a.m., the house was still empty. That's when the panic started to set in. She began reaching out to John's friends, anyone who might know where he was, but no one had seen or heard from him. Then, at 4:53 a.m., she called Jennifer McCabe. According to McCabe's later testimony, Karen was hysterical on the phone, shouting her name, saying John never came home and that they had gotten into a fight. Karen, based off McCabe's statement, told Jen she had left John at the Waterfall bar, but McCabe corrected her, "We saw you outside my sister's house." McCabe's statement said Karen replied to her that she didn't even remember going there, and then Karen started to panic. She began shouting, Jen, did I hit him? Could I have hit him?" And then allegedly telling McCabe something else. She had a cracked taillight. In the eyes of the prosecution, this moment was damning. Why, they asked, would someone immediately assume they hit someone with a car, unless they already knew they had? It became one of the central questions of the case. Karen also reached out to Carrie Roberts, a longtime friend of John's, who wasn't there that night. Carrie later said she got a phone call from Karen around 5 a.m., during which Karen screamed her name and mentioned John being dead before abruptly hanging up. Karen would later say she didn't remember saying that. She believed she may have said, "I'm worried he might be dead," but never that he was. The two spoke again. Carrie recalled Karen, expressing fear that John might have been hit by a snowplow. Something was wrong. Something had clearly happened. By 5:45 a.m., the three women, Karen, Jen, and Carrie, were in a car driving back toward John's home. Carrie later said that during the drive, Karen pointed out her damaged taillight. That struck Carrie as odd, considering Karen had just said she didn't remember anything from the night before. Carrie asked, "Do you think you hit him?" Karen reportedly responded with the same question, "Do you think I hit him?" Carrie didn't think so, but she did think Karen might have hit something. Inside John's house, there was no sign of him. He wasn't in the bedroom, not in the basement, not on the porch. Karen, now frantic, insisted they drive back to 34 Fairview. During the ride over, tensions boiled over in the car. Jen later said Karen was screaming, calling both of their names over and over, and repeating the same questions again. Could I have hit him? Did I hit him? Carrie at one point told her to be quiet, to sit back, buckle up, and focus. At 6:04 a.m., just as the sun began to rise over the snow-covered streets of Fairview Road, the car carrying Karen Reed, Jennifer McCabe, and Carrie Roberts came to a stop, and within seconds, everything changed. Karen reportedly jumped out of the car before it had even fully stopped, running straight toward a mound of in the snow was John O'Keefe's body. Karen later said that when she reached him, he was perfectly still, his mouth slightly open, his face bloodied and bruised. She noticed a small piece of glass perched on the bridge of his nose, which she removed, and according to her, blood immediately began to gush down his face. He was wearing the same thin clothes from the night before. His eyes were purple, one eyelid split open, and a cut ran down his face. She tried to resuscitate him. She pinched his nose, blew into his mouth, and heard a gurgling sound. Her first thought, he had left drunk, fallen, and maybe choked on his own vomit in the snow. Karen said she wanted to roll him over, but Gary, horrified, yelled for her to stop, shouting for her to leave him exactly how he was. Jennifer McCabe was the one to dial 911. "I need someone to come immediately to 34 Fairview. There's a guy unresponsive in the snow." Soon, first responders arrived. Sergeant Michael Link of the Canton Police Department made the initial radio call. "We have a Boston PO that was just found in the snow here and does have some trauma to his head. Not sure if he's been in a fight or whatever." The scene was frantic. Karen could be seen on police body cam footage, pacing, screaming, crying. Karen later described herself as like a chicken, yelling and running around. Some paramedics and officers would later testify that they heard Karen say, "I hit him," or words to that effect. But when the defense reviewed the footage, there was no such statement. In the videos and recordings available to the public, what can be heard are things like, "Is he dead? Is he dead?" Not, "I hit him." And that distinction, the defense argued, was critical. It started pouring out, but have I ever showed you guys this snack? I think I did, right? This fruit gummies. It's upside down because I opened it. But these are mango and blueberry. Mango and blueberry. All the ingredients are is mango and blueberry. That's it. It's not cool. Hopefully we don't mind the rain sounds. Alright. Even more telling, at the scene that morning, CPD officer Steven Serap was standing directly across from Karen and Jennifer McCabe. If she had made such a confession, he was in the best position to hear it. But when he took the stand, he testified that he never heard Karen say she hit John. The defense pointed to this as a major flaw in the prosecution's narrative. If she had admitted guilt on the spot, with dozens of officers present, why wasn't she arrested immediately? Instead, Karen wasn't arrested until 3 days later. As the case developed, prosecutors attempted to present a meticulous breakdown of Karen's drinking that night. Lead prosecutor Adam Lally tallied her drinks with precision, timestamps from bar receipts and video footage. Drink 1, 8:58 p.m. Drink 2, 9:13. Drink 3, 9:20. Drink 4, 9:33, and so on, totaling 9 drinks by the time they left the Waterfall bar. But Karen's team pushed back. Karen claimed the prosecution was double counting, that a shot and a drink were being treated as 4 separate drinks. She also said that some drinks were bought for her, but never consumed. By her math, she had consumed about 6 drinks over the course of 3 hours. And it wasn't just Karen who had been drinking. According to one journalist covering the trial, everyone at the bars and at that house that night was drinking heavily. Yet, these same people were now being called to the stand, claiming to testify with clarity and precision about a night clouded in alcohol and missing time. The morning of January 29th, 2022, outside 34 Fairview Road was cold, chaotic, and already politically charged. At first, it was the Canton Police Police Department that handled the scene. Not because they were supposed to, but because the Massachusetts State Police, who typically investigate major crimes like this, couldn't arrive fast enough due to the blizzard. The first sweep of the property produced just a few items. A cocktail glass. Whoa. A cocktail glass shattered in pieces and blood collected into 6 red Solo cups, then placed into a brown Stop and Shop grocery bag. That was the initial evidence log for what may have been a homicide. Questions were raised quickly. One of the first officers to enter the house was Sergeant Michael Link, not a state detective, but a local officer with known ties to the Albert family. That relationship drew criticism. Why was someone connected to the homeowners helping lead an investigation that might involve them? Meanwhile, John O'Keefe's body was carefully examined. His clothing was collected piece by piece. Detectives noted a crucial detail. Only one sneaker was found at the scene. To investigators, this suggested the possibility of a vehicle strike. In car versus pedestrian collisions, it's common for a victim to be knocked out of one or both shoes, a detail often used to reconstruct how an impact occurred. So attention turned immediately to Karen's SUV. That same afternoon, detectives went to Karen's parents' home where her black Lexus SUV was parked. They noted visible damage to the right rear taillight. The car was seized around 4:12 p.m. and taken to the Canton Police Department, just minutes from the Albert residence where Brian Albert's brother, Detective Kevin Albert, worked. Later that evening at around 5 p.m., a specialized state search and rescue team, CERT, finally arrived at 34 Fairview to conduct a formal evidence sweep. It was now 11 hours after John's body was found. At 5:46 p.m., the first photograph appeared in the evidence log, a bright red shard of taillight resting conspicuously on top of a snowbank, not buried beneath it, where it would have been for nearly 12 hours. Over the next 15 minutes, CERT reportedly discovered additional red and clear taillight fragments, John's missing black sneaker, and more broken plastic pieces ranging in number from 2 to 6, depending on the testimony. By 6:15 p.m., the finds had stopped, and by 6:20 p.m., so did the photos. But here's where things get strange or suspicious, depending on who you believe. In earlier testimony, investigators who had arrived on scene around 7:30 a.m. were asked if they saw even one piece of broken plastic, red, black, or clear. Their answer, no, not one. No taillight debris was visible in any of the body cam footage from that morning. No photos exist showing the shards until nearly 12 hours later, after Karen's SUV had already been seized. Karen's defense saw a red flag, or maybe 46 of them. According to court filings, 46 more pieces of red plastic, alleged taillight debris, were found by lead investigator Michael Proctor over the next 2.5 weeks, all outside 34 Fairview. The defense's theory, Karen did damage her taillight, but not at the scene of John's death. She backed into John's parked car at his house at 5:07 a.m. and ring camera footage shows the moment it happened. No taillight pieces were found in that driveway, but the taillight itself was cracked. Defense attorneys argued this moment was deliberately manipulated, suggesting Karen backed into the car to create a plausible explanation for taillight damage, or perhaps more explosively, that someone in law enforcement planted taillight fragments from Karen's vehicle at 34 Fairview. The timeline raised eyebrows. 4:12 p.m. Karen's SUV is seized. 5 p.m., CERT arrives at the crime scene. 5:46 p.m., taillight debris is discovered. Over the next 15 minutes, several more pieces are logged and photographed, and then nothing. But it didn't stop there. In testimony, a journalist recounted how strange it was that such important forensic evidence, taillight shards, a missing shoe, would just happen to appear all at once, hours after the scene was cleared and after the suspect's vehicle was already in police custody. It raised a central question in the trial. Were these pieces of plastic really overlooked that morning in a blizzard, or were they never there at all? Defense attorneys have long believed the case against Karen Read isn't just wrong, it's orchestrated. At the center of that theory is a claim far more serious than a misunderstanding or an error in judgment. That evidence was actively planted. Their reason: inside 34 Fairview that night was Brian Albert, an active Boston police officer. The lead investigator on that case, Michael Proctor, had known the Albert family for decades. The defense argued that this close connection created a conflict of interest from the very beginning. One moment in particular became a flashpoint during cross-examination. Investigators had received footage of Karen's SUV, which had been seized and parked at the Canton Police Department. On the surveillance video, the word police appeared backwards, revealing that the video had been mirrored. What everyone believed to be the right rear of the car, where the taillight was allegedly cracked, turned out to be the left side. That detail changed everything, because on the supposedly wrong side, now revealed as the true location of the damage, a head appears, and at one point you can just make out Michael Proctor's hat above the vehicle, positioned exactly where the cracked taillight was located and just out of view of the camera. The defense asked the courtroom, what was he doing back there? Meanwhile, the prosecution focused on Karen's behavior. One of John's friends observed that during the trial, even during the most brutal, emotional testimony, Karen didn't show any visible emotion. Jurors were seen crying, but Karen, he said, remained completely stoic. Back at 34 Fairview, the night of John O'Keefe's death, the house was full. According to court records, present that night were Brian Albert and his wife Nicole, their children Caitlin and Brian Jr., who was celebrating his birthday, a few of Brian Jr.'s friends, Jennifer McCabe, Nicole's sister, Matthew McCabe, Jennifer's husband, and Brian Higgins, a federal ATF agent. Every single one of them claimed that John O'Keefe never came inside the house. Not only that, they all said they left the house that night and never saw a body on the front lawn. That body, of course, would later be found just feet from the driveway. The driveway, importantly, sits at the far right side of the house. John's body was found on the far left side of the yard, partially buried in snow. The FBI testified that given the conditions, darkness, cold, and the urgency of getting to a warm car, it is possible no one noticed him lying there. But the defense wasn't buying it. If John never went inside the home, they argued, then his body must have been there the entire time, visible if someone had been looking. To counter that, 8 months after John's death, a new witness came forward, Julie Nagel. Julie had been at the house that night for Brian Jr.'s birthday. She told investigators that she had seen something strange, a dark blob in the yard, but didn't realize it was a person. Curiously, Julie wasn't interviewed immediately after John's death. It wasn't until months later that Michael Proctor conducted a private, unrecorded sit-down with her, and only then did this detail surface. Julie's brother Ryan Nagel was also drawn into the timeline. He He had driven to 34 Fairview that night to pick up his sister. She texted him needing a ride, but when he arrived, she changed her mind. While Ryan was parked outside, both he and Julie saw a car, Karen Reed's SUV, pull forward and stop in the street. Julie went back inside. Ryan drove past Karen's vehicle slowly and said he saw a woman sitting in the front seat, hands locked on 10 and 2, staring forward. But he never saw John in the vehicle and didn't see him exit. To the defense, it begged the question, if John wasn't in the car, where was he? Their answer, inside the house. And then there's Brian Albert. The defense portrayed him as the possible mastermind behind a cover-up, the one person with both the means and the motive to hide what happened. Brian, a trained first responder, claimed he and his wife slept through the chaos outside, through the screaming, the police sirens, the flashing lights, during a blizzard with storm windows shut. It's possible, but to many watching, it didn't sit right. Why, they asked, if a man was dying on your lawn, would you never open the door? Why, if you were innocent, would you not come outside? The defense's theory has never wavered. Whatever happened to John O'Keefe that night, it didn't happen in the snow. It happened inside 34 Fairview. Lead investigator Trooper Michael Proctor, they say, never once walked into that house, not during the initial investigation, not after evidence was uncovered, and not when questions began to rise. For the defense, that detail was glaring. In May 2022, the defense received John's autopsy and hospital photos. That's when they noticed something odd. Deep, scratch-like gouges along John's right arm. Karen's mother raised a disturbing possibility. Could these be dog bites? The theory gained traction when they remembered that Brian Albert owned a German Shepherd, a 70 to 90 pound dog that he had described himself as not good with strangers, and that dog was inside the house that night. To investigate the theory further, the defense brought in Dr. Marie Russell, a forensic pathologist. Her conclusion was shocking. The nature of the injuries to John O'Keefe's arm, she said, is consistent with a large dog attack. She pointed to what she called both bite wounds and scratch wounds, specifically superficial marks that aligned with canine teeth, and a deeper pattern near the wrist that she believed matched the curvature of a dog's jaw. And crucially, she explained that she ruled out a car accident almost immediately, as she's seen hundreds of pedestrian versus vehicle fatalities, and these wounds don't match. The prosecution pushed back. They called in a canine DNA expert who had tested 2 swabs from John's clothing. The results, no dog DNA was detected. Instead, the lab found pig DNA, which the expert explained can be traced back to cooked pork or bacon, depending on where the shirt had been worn and what the wearer had come into contact with. But on cross-examination, the defense posed a different possibility. Could pig DNA come from a dog treat? Yes, the expert said that's possible. The defense then tried to track down the German Shepherd to get answers, to measure its teeth, examine its claws, but by then, it was too late. The Albert family had rehomed the dog in May 2022. The very same month, the defense received those injury photos. So what does the defense believe happened that night? They believe John got out of Karen's SUV and walked into the home. Something happened inside, an argument, a confrontation. Maybe he was lured to the basement where words escalated into violence, a punch thrown, a fall, or a dog attack. Not an intentional murder, but a fight that went too far. And when it was over, John was dead. According to the defense, at some point before 6 a.m., his body was moved, dragged out to the front yard, and left in the snow. But to believe that every adult in that house, including multiple police officers, federal agents, and family members, either took part in a cover-up or remained silent about a killing for more than 2 years. Then came another wrinkle, one that prosecutors leaned on heavily to cast doubt on Karen Reed's credibility. In court, Brian Higgins, a federal ATF agent and one of the people at 34 Fairview that night, took the stand. The prosecution presented text messages between Karen and Brian, exchanged just weeks before John's death. Karen texted him, "You're hot." Higgins responded, "Are you serious or messing with me?" "No, I'm serious," Karen replied. "Feeling is mutual. Is that bad?" he said back. The flirting escalated quickly. "We're single and don't have kids. We can do whatever we want," Karen texted. "What do you like about me?" he replied. Karen replied, "I just feel like you're from my neighborhood, and I think you're hot." "You really think that? I've always thought that about you, that you're hot, smart, witty, but I didn't think you were interested." Karen replied back, "Do you like me?" "Yes, from jump." "When was jump?" He says, "First time I saw you." She texted, "Come over to my house." Higgins admitted on the stand that Karen had kissed him. For prosecutors, it was a potential motive, or at least a reason for turmoil in the relationship between Karen and John. An FBI investigator even described the exchange as an aha moment, believing that it might explain why Karen had been reluctant to go to the after party at the Albert residence, knowing Higgins would be there. If the prosecution had one card to play when it came to motive, it was this: the relationship between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe was falling apart. In the weeks leading up to John's death, their relationship, already strained, had taken a turn. Karen admitted that she and Brian Higgins, a federal ATF agent, had a flirtatious relationship that lasted about 2 weeks, right after a rocky vacation in Aruba. John, Karen, and the kids had flown to Aruba to meet up with some of John's friends Karen didn't really know. There was a lot of drinking, late nights, and tension. On New Year's Eve, Karen says she was walking through the lobby of the hotel when she spotted John hugging a woman she didn't recognize. That woman was Marietta Sullivan, a longtime friend of John's late sister, Laura. Karen's reaction: she reportedly screamed across the lobby, "Who the F is that?" John tried to calm her down, saying, "That's Laura's little sister." Marietta recalled Karen telling her to go F herself. Karen later admitted she felt guilty and apologized, but said that kind of emotional outburst, anger, jealousy, insecurity, that was how her and John's relationship rolled into 2022. That's when the Brian Higgins situation began. Karen was the one who initiated the text relationship with Higgins. He once texted, "I just assumed you were happy with your situation." Karen responded, "It's very, very complicated. He and I dated when we were kids, and then his sister died and everything got effed up." While Higgins didn't shut her down, he was cautious, but he didn't say no either. Prosecutors argued this wasn't just flirting, it was motive. They painted a picture of a relationship unraveling and Karen not wanting to let go. On January 28th, 2022, the day before John died, Karen sent John a series of emotional texts. At 9:49 a.m. she wrote, "You really hurt me this time." Then at 2:25, "Tell me if you're interested in someone else. I can't think of any other reason you've been like this." John replied, "Nope. Things haven't been great between us for a while. Ever consider that?" Then again, "Sick of always arguing and fighting. It's been weekly for months. So yeah, I'm not as quick to jump back into being lovey-dovey as you apparently." Later that day, John texted, "OMG, stop calling." When Karen asked if he was going out that night, John replied, "Karen, I don't know." To the prosecution, this was key. They alleged John was trying to leave and Karen wouldn't let that happen. Then there were the late night phone calls on the night of John's death, suspicious butt dials. Two of the key witnesses, Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, both told investigators that they hadn't spoken after the party ended. But phone records showed at 2:22 a.m., Brian Albert called Brian Higgins. Higgins called him back and they both spoke for 22 seconds. Both men insisted the calls were accidental. Then there was Jennifer McCabe, who told defense attorneys that she spoke to John at 12:14 a.m., called again at 12:29 a.m., but said it wasn't answered, then called John's phone repeatedly for the next 10 minutes. She claimed those calls were all butt dials. But the defense sees it differently. To the defense, the sheer number of accidental calls, 8 separate butt dials across multiple phones, just doesn't add up. They suggested more chilling possibility. John's phone was inside the house, they argue. He had already been attacked, and now the people inside were trying to find his phone, dialing it over and over in hopes of making it ring. The jury will ultimately have to decide, was this a series of truly coincidental misdials, or the sloppy cover-up of a chaotic scene? For the defense, few things screamed cover-up louder than what happened with Brian Higgins' phone. Brian Higgins, a federal agent, and Karen's recent flirtation, admitted he destroyed the phone he had at the time of John's death. He said the reason was professional. He'd been contacted by the girlfriend of a suspect in an active investigation and feared exposure. So according to Higgins, he broke the SIM card, put the phone in a trash bag, and drove to a military base to throw it away. Shortly before, police formally told him not to destroy evidence. The defense didn't buy it. The day before he's told to keep the phone, it's destroyed. That's not just suspicious, that's convenient, they argued. Then came the 2:27 a.m. Google search on Jennifer McCabe's phone. How long to die in the cold? That search was made hours before John's body was discovered, hours before anyone publicly knew he was dead, and was deleted from her phone. When asked about it, Jennifer said she Googled it at Karen's request around 6 a.m. She was screaming, "Google hypothermia. How long does it take to die in the cold?" So I did. Prosecution experts claim that 2:27 a.m. timestamp was just a technical quirk caused by reusing an old tab in her Safari browser. But defense expert Rick Green said otherwise. That's not how it works on that iOS version. The 2:27 a.m. search was made at 2:27 a.m. Then came the issue of bias within the investigation. The defense dug into the behavior of Michael Proctor, the lead state trooper. They pointed out he had long-standing ties to the Alberts. He had never entered the house at 34 Fairview, the very place they believed John was attacked. And he oversaw a crime scene where taillight fragments seemingly appeared long after they should have been noticed. But perhaps no moment was more damaging than the behavior of his exchanged private texts about Karen Reed in a group chat with friends, only 16 hours into the investigation. He writes, "She's a babe. Weird Fall River accent though. No butt. She's a whack job. See you next Tuesday." Defense asked Michael, "What did you write after you talked about going through the RETARDD client's phone?" Michael Proctor said he wrote, "No nudes so far." And then, when his sister texted him about Karen, he wrote back, "I hope she offs herself." The defense used those texts to show an investigator poisoned by personal contempt, and one who perhaps shaped the case around what he already believed to be true. Prosecutors called Trooper Paul a crash reconstructionist with the Massachusetts State Police. He examined Karen's black box data and presented a theory. Karen backed up 62.5 feet between 0 and 24 miles per hour, then came to an abrupt stop, possibly hitting John in the down, resulting in his death. But under cross-examination, Trooper Paul admitted he has no degree in physics, biomechanics, or accident reconstruction. He's trained in administration of justice, not hard sciences, and his theory included things like John doing a pirouette and flying 30 feet with no major torso, rib, or back injuries. The defense called in 2 experts from ARCA, a company that does reconstruction work for the FBI, the NHL, and other agencies. These were credentialed scientists with PhDs in biomechanics and physics. Their findings: the damage to the taillight was not consistent with striking a human body or arm. A side swipe, by its nature, wouldn't launch a pedestrian. The injuries to John's skull were not caused by an SUV impact. There's no way a vehicle strike killed John, one of them said flatly. Then how did John die? Which brings us here. If you don't believe Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe with her car, and if you don't believe he died by accident in the snow, then what happened? The defense theory is clear. John entered 34 Fairview that night. He got into an altercation inside the home, possibly in the basement. At some point, he suffered blunt force trauma to the head. He may have also been attacked by a dog, the Albert's 70 to 90 pound German Shepherd, which was rehomed in May 2022 before it could be examined. Then his body was moved to the front yard and staged. Evidence, including taillight fragments, was either planted or manipulated. Key witnesses and law enforcement had personal ties, biases, and in some cases, possible motives to protect one another. But the prosecution insists there was no conspiracy, no cover-up, no planted evidence. John O'Keefe's death was a tragic accident caused by a drunk, jealous woman backing into him with her SUV. And that's where the jury is left. If you reject the theory that Karen Reed struck and killed John with her car, you're left with a version of events that implicates an entire group of people, including law enforcement, in either a murder or a cover-up. So ask yourself, could that many people keep a secret for 3 years? Or is this a defense team spinning shadows into doubt? That's the question the jury must answer. Brendan Kane, a close friend of John O'Keefe, offered a theory. John was likely standing off to the side, holding the cocktail glass he left the waterfall bar with. A chip on the back of Karen Reed's Lexus lined up with where a man of John's height, 6'1", would be holding such a glass. Kane believed the Lexus, traveling around 24 miles an hour, struck the glass in John's hand, and that the taillight housing clipped him, causing the deep arm injuries. Sharp shards from the broken taillight could have been responsible. According to Kane, John spun out from the impact and hit his head, either on the curb or the frozen ground, resulting in the fatal laceration. Medical examiner Dr. Irene Scorti-Bello conducted John's autopsy. She confirmed head trauma and signs of hypothermia. However, she could not determine whether the injuries were accidental or intentional, listing the cause of death as undetermined. She also noted that John's injuries didn't resemble typical pedestrian versus car trauma. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence. John's DNA was found on the broken taillight of Karen's SUV, as well as on a shattered cocktail glass at the scene. A single hair, consistent with John's, was discovered on the rear passenger side of the vehicle, precisely where the state claimed he was struck. Prosecutors argued that the blizzard that night could have frozen the evidence onto the car, preserving it despite the car being driven over 60 miles. The defense countered with 2 points. First, John had been in a long-term relationship with Karen. His DNA would be expected on her car. 2, they questioned how a single hair could survive such a long trip through a blizzard, if not planted or misinterpreted. Then came the snowplow driver, Brian 2:30 a.m., roughly 2 hours after the alleged impact, he drove by the O'Keefe residence. He testified that using the elevated lights on his truck, he saw nothing on the lawn, no body, no disturbance. His statement cast doubt on the prosecution's timeline. As closing arguments wrapped, Karen Reed was visibly anxious, unsure of what the future held. Outside of the courtroom was packed with over 300 supporters. Defense attorney Alan Jackson delivered an emotional and commanding summation. In contrast, prosecutor Adam Lally's closing was fact-heavy and drawn out. Observers noted jurors appearing disengaged. Lally even ran out of time, cut off mid-argument by the judge. The jury, 6 men, 6 women, began deliberating. After 6 hours, they requested the search report, but the judge declined to provide more evidence. By day 4, after 18 and a half hours of deliberations, the jury informed the court they were deadlocked. The foreman described an exhaustive review of the evidence but no possible consensus. Meanwhile, John's friend Brendan expressed anger upon learning that the jury could hear chanting from outside, arguing it was unfairly influencing them. On July 1st, 2024, after 26 and a half hours of deliberation, the judge declared a mistrial. The case didn't end there. A second trial was set for April 2025. In the months that followed, key developments unfolded. Trooper Michael Proctor was fired in March 2025. The O'Keefe family filed a civil suit against Karen Reed, which remains pending. Then, on June 18, 2025, the second trial came to a dramatic close. Karen Reed was acquitted of murder. She was, however, convicted of operating a vehicle under the influence and sentenced to 1 year of probation. The long, bitter legal battle may be over, but for many involved, the questions haven't gone away. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to join the Cheechling family. I would love to have you a part of my Cheechling family. Until next time, this is